He never held a sword, never wore armor, never spent a single day training for war. But this man, no, this eunuch, led army into battle. Hundreds of thousands died. The emperor was captured by the enemy. The country nearly collapsed. Here's the strange part. When the emperor finally came home, he didn't erase this man's name. He built him a shrine, made the entire nation worship him like a hero. What does a eunuch have to do to earn that? Let's start with a disaster. It was the summer of 1449. 200,000 men were marching home from a war that had already been lost before it began. At the head of the column, the Emperor of China, 22 years old. Riding beside him, a eunuch named Wang Zhen. Not a soldier, not a strategist, just the man who talked his way into command of an army he had no idea how to run. They were close to the capital. A few more days and they'd be safe behind the walls of the Forbidden City. Then Wang Zhen wanted a detour. His hometown was a short ride away. Let the army pass through it, he said. Let the people who'd once looked down on him watch him ride home at the head of 200,000 soldiers. The column turned. Then he changed his mind. All those soldiers marching through his family's field would ruin the harvest. The column turned again. It cost them almost nothing, a few hours, maybe less. It was enough. The Mongol cavalry chasing them closed the gap. The army reached the ridge called Tumu. High ground should have been defensible. There was just one problem. No water, not a stream, not a well, nothing for miles. 2 days passed, 200,000 men sitting on a dry hill, more people than live in some mid-sized American cities, and not one drop to drink between them. Soldiers dug wells 20 feet down. Nothing came up but dust. Then the Mongols did something strange. They pulled back, looked like a retreat. It was a trap. There was a river just beyond the ridge. Discipline broke. Men scattered toward the water. That was the moment the cavalry turned around. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a catastrophe. The army broke apart in minutes. Generals died where they stood. Ministers died where they stood. Some of the most powerful men in the empire were left bleeding in the dust outside the town most of them had never heard of a week before. By the end of the day, the emperor's army no longer existed. Neither did much of his government. In the chaos, Wang Zhen's own bodyguard found him. He raised an iron mace. I killed this traitor for the realm. One blow ended the most powerful eunuch in China. It changed nothing. The disaster was already complete. The emperor was still on his horse when the men around him stopped moving. He climbed down, sat on the ground facing south, and waited. A Mongol soldier approached to take his armor. Then he stopped, looked again. This wasn't a general, this wasn't a prince. This was the Emperor of China. Within hours, the news spread across the battlefield. In a single afternoon, the Ming Dynasty lost an army, lost its government, and very nearly lost its ruler. And the eunuch responsible was already dead. Which raises the obvious question, how does the eunuch end up with so much power? 80 years earlier, the founder of the dynasty had seen this danger coming. He was so afraid of eunuchs seizing power that he ordered an iron plaque hung inside the palace. Eunuchs are forbidden from interfering in state affairs. Break that rule and death follows. Wang Zhen had the plaque taken down, then melted. Nobody stopped him, nobody even tried. By then, the people who once kept him in check were gone. The emperor's grandmother was dead. The old ministers were dead or retired. And the young emperor trusted Wang Zhen more than anyone else. What followed wasn't influence, it was domination. Officials began bringing gifts before every audience, not because they admired him, because they feared him. Refusing wasn't really an option. One official did refuse. He broke no law, committed no crime. He simply refused to play the game. Wang Zhen had him locked in a wooden collar and displayed outside the palace gates for days. Another day, Wang Zhen noticed that a senior official had no beard. He mocked him in front of the court. The official immediately bowed and replied, "If my father has none, how could his son?" The official was talking about Wang Zhen, and he wasn't alone. Many officials were calling Wang Zhen father. A eunuch being called father by the man who ran the empire. By the 1440s, Wang Zhen had become something almost unimaginable. He wasn't a general, he wasn't even a minister, but he was the second most powerful man in the empire, right below the emperor himself. So why did Wang Zhen push for a war that could destroy everything? He already had almost everything he wanted, because the boy emperor trusted him. The officials feared him, they obeyed him, but they didn't respect him. He knew exactly how they saw him. A castrated failed teacher who'd talked his way into power he was never supposed to hold. What Wang Zhen wanted was something fear couldn't manufacture. A title nobody could sneer at, power nobody could challenge. There was only one path in this empire that turned men into legends instead of punchlines. War. Decades earlier, the emperor's great-grandfather had personally ridden out 5 times to fight the Mongols. Inside the palace, those campaigns were not just history, they were the standard every emperor after him got mirrored against. The young emperor also wanted his own chapter, to prove that he wasn't just a boy who had inherited the throne, but a warrior in his own right. Wang Zhen saw that hunger. He had one of his own to match it. When Mongol raiders crossed the border that summer, both of them saw an opportunity. The ministers saw only danger. They begged the emperor not to go. With Wang Zhen urging him on, the young emperor ignored them completely. What happened next was even harder to believe. 3 days later, the army marched. 3 days to organize 200,000 men for a campaign into hostile territory. Some backyard weddings takes longer to plan than that. That explains why they marched. It doesn't explain why the young emperor trusted the eunuch so much. Officials called Wang Zhen father out of fear. Only one person in that palace had ever called him something close to that, and actually meant it. For that story, we have to go back further. Back before the throne, back to a 9-year-old boy. In 1424, at nearly 50 years old, Wang Zhen castrated himself and entered the palace as an ordinary eunuch. Even that took luck. The emperor had just issued a rare policy allowing it. Before that, Wang Zhen's life had been one long failure. He'd sat the imperial exams again and again and never passed. Decades as a teacher and never once promoted. Under the law at the time, he was about to be exiled. Then the emperor made an announcement. Men like Wang Zhen, willing to be castrated, could serve inside the palace instead. Wang Zhen didn't really have a choice, he walked in. But even inside, he didn't get what he wanted right away. He waited 8 years before he was finally assigned to a 5-year-old prince as a tutor. That little prince became emperor at 9 years old. 9, ruling the largest empire on earth. Surrounded by ministers who'd served his father, he barely knew any of them. The one person in that palace who wasn't a stranger, who'd taught him, played with him, stayed close through all of it, was Wang Zhen. One afternoon, the emperor's grandmother, the Grand Empress Dowager, summoned Wang Zhen. In front of several of the most senior officials in the empire, she wanted him dead. His crime? She believed she had seen the danger before anyone else. A eunuch was supposed to serve the emperor. Instead, Wang Zhen was beginning to influence him. He wasn't just managing the boy's daily life anymore, he was helping shape the decisions of an empire. That was exactly what the plague had been there to prevent. An attendant stepped forward with a blade and held it to his throat. The young emperor broke down, tears streaming. He dropped to his knees and begged for his teacher's life. The Grand Empress Dowager hesitated. She let him go. It would become one of the biggest regrets of her life, because years later, after she died, Wang Zhen did every single thing she'd been afraid of. But that afternoon changed something else too. A boy and a eunuch had just survived a life or death moment together, and whatever bond existed between them before, it was stronger than ever. 8 years after the disastrous war, the emperor returned to the throne. He didn't erase Wang Zhen. He restored his titles and built a shrine where people could come and pray to him. He never forgot him. That shrine stood for over 100 years, until an emperor from the next dynasty finally had it torn down. History remembers Wang Zhen as a eunuch who doomed the empire. The emperor remembers him like a father he never had. Maybe those two things were never actually in conflict. When emotion and reason collide, how would you choose? Leave your thoughts in the comments.